Okay, so what I'm going to discuss in the next, whatever is available, officially 15 minutes, but I'll try to be more efficient, is using, basically the nub of what I'm going to present is using what's been going on in linguistic analysis of language and related and phenomena related to that as a model. And it turns out, although I hadn't completely anticipated this, that the prior two discussions, especially Dr. Manzotti's, really comport well by convergence of scientific approach to what is in fact becoming a dominant force in our understanding of many aspects of language as the result themselves of natural law. I'm not a philosopher, but I will read my presentation today to some extent, because otherwise I will get caught in some red herring and forget myself and then never get to the end. So I apologize for reading when I go to a philosophy conference. It's dreadful, but I think it's necessary in this case, and I'll try to be as clear as I can be. So the first point is that within the framework, actually I'm not reading, I'm just doing it extempore, so forgive me. In the framework of cognitive neuroscience and the history of behavioral science, so-called before that, that blended into cognitive science, there were many instances of well-known researchers and scholars who were committed for much of their career to the study of individual neurons or neuronal areas as the proper way to explore the basis for behavior and then later for cognition. But towards the end of their careers, in many ways and in many different instances, the particular person who had built his or her reputation around the study of neurons and neuronal areas had a kind of apotheosis of one sort or another, and presented arguments that really undercut the dependence on single unit interpretations of complex behavior, and in particular undercut the role of individual neurons or individual areas, as opposed to some kind of larger global organization. There are many notable people. I have a slide about it if it ever gets to appear. And I won't go through it all. I'll just mention sort of two of the many outstanding people in this conversion of sorts, or confessional. One is Tolman, well-known behavioral scientist studying rats in mazes and related things, who finally admitted, or in late mid-career admitted or proclaimed, that in fact, left to their own devices, animals intuitively, without any reinforcement, create maps of where they are that they then can access if called on to solve some problem that's related to it. Much more recently, and still contemporary, Randy Gallistel and his colleagues have elaborated examples in which very complex behaviors, from a standpoint of computational modeling, are carried out by very simple brains with a number of neurons in the thousands rather than the millions or billions, if you take into account the synaptic connections. And a simple example is the everyday idiom of a beeline, in which bees actually are doing some version of dead reckoning. Also, there's a famous desert spider that does this while they wander around looking for good food or a good place to have a nest. The next beehive, in the case of bees, they manage to keep track of where home base is, and indeed make what we refer to idiomatically as a beeline to get back home. Well, that's not so easy to do, as any middle Earth navigator will tell you. It took a while to figure out how to do dead reckoning, which is DED, by the way, for those of you who are not sailors, meaning deductive reckoning. And so part of their argument, at Gallistel and others' arguments, is that the number of neurons is picayune compared to the human brain or many other animals. And yet the kind of computation that is being carried out is itself very, very complex. And it has to be learned by humans explicitly in order to do it. The point I'm making is that dissatisfaction with the neuronal model and the model based on interactions between clumps of neurons has been frustrating and has been an object of dissatisfaction within cognitive science and within behavioral science before that. Some of the most prestigious neurophysiologists have, in the later part of their careers, expressed dissatisfaction, recognizing that there were levels of complexity involved in natural behaviors that could not be, in principle, could not be described by these simpler ideas. So let me turn now to how this expresses itself in modern linguistics and study of language. The main contribution that Chomsky made, aside from many particular formal ones and spin-offs into even how algorithms are organized and other kinds of applications, the main contribution with respect to our understanding of language is how to study it. Namely, to have as our aim, not worrying about how it's learned, how it's forgotten, how people use it to get along with each other, but rather to focus on what language is. What is it as an object? And of course, what it turns out to be best interpreted as, at least in the current models, is it's a compositional, computational structure. And so what a language is actually a set of computational rules, or you can think of them as rules, that interact in certain ways, specifiable ways, that result in a definition of the language, in effect. And so this way of looking at it allows us to study how language, viewed that way, fits into many other aspects of human life, how it is learned, used, lost in the case of damage, how it interacts with thought, is computed by the brain, and most specifically of interest in this context today, how it interacts with natural laws governing computations themselves, not necessarily physical laws as we think of them sometimes, but in the sense that there's certain natural laws that constrain likely and best computations. So we have, from all of this, an understanding of the limits of trying to explain language based on paired elemental bases, such as interacting neurons. So to elaborate this a little bit, what we know when we are able to study language in this way and how it interacts with other aspects that we observe as in humans when they manipulate language or learn it, there are many facts that cannot be simply accommodated by the idea that the essence of language, what makes language possible, is the result of some specific widget, some specific set of neurons, some specific area of the brain. But there are certain aspects that have to be thought of as responsive to what we could view as natural law, laws that naturally constrain and organize computations. I'll just list a few of them, but I won't say much more. trying to connect to the slides is going to be distracting at this point. So, for example, language persists in the context of serious brain damage, in the context of serious damage of the left hemisphere. In many cases, we discover, if the damage is early enough in life, that the right hemisphere, in fact, has the same capacity. There are anomalous organizations of brain. For example, the result of hydrocephalus can be that what we think of as a lumpy brain filling the skull, actually, for such people, sometimes the organization of the brain tissue is half a centimeter thick layer plastered up against the skull. And yet, these such people can be very, very accomplished, in particular with respect to their language ability. There are many other phenomena that show that in the context of individual variability in neuronal organization, language still persists as a possibility. And this raises the question then, and complements or supports the question, where is the essence of language to be found in the brain? And that's a great puzzle. Let me just adjust my, I'm reading to some extent or looking at my notes, which is why I'm looking down and you're only seeing the top half of my face.